Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Forensic Investigator podcast, hosted by Dr. Jim. Today's topic is going to be about investigative interviewing 1, considering it to be the basics. And as we move through this discussion, I want you to keep 2 principles in mind. 1 is the 80-20 rule, and 2 is the use of open-ended questions. Now listen carefully to this. It's an excerpt from a study that was done on police interviewing techniques. One study found that the average police interview included just 3 open-ended questions and 26 closed-ended questions, with an average pause of only 1 second between each question. Now, most detectives interrupted the responses to open-ended questions after just 7.5 seconds, averaging 4 interruptions per response. Not one of the interviews studied allowed the person to complete an uninterrupted answer. Think about what that means. If a witness, a victim, or a suspect is interrupted before they can fully respond, the investigator is not getting the whole story. And if the investigator is not getting the whole story, then the truth may remain incomplete. According to an article in the FBI Law Enforcement Bulletin, the 80-20 rule for police interview means that the subject, whether suspect, witness, or victim, should do about 80% of the talking, while the interviewing officer should speak only about 20% of the time. That 20% should be used to ask open-ended questions, guide the conversation, and create space for a full and accurate narrative without dominating the interview. When we compare that standard to the findings of the study, the contrast is striking. Traditional police questioning too often fails to capture a witness's or victim's true, unvarnished account. Instead of drawing out memory and context, it can narrow, rush, and distort the information being gathered. Here's where the problem begins. First, there is an imbalance in question types. When investigators rely heavily on closed-ended questions rather than open-ended, the conversation becomes a rigid question and answer exchange. Yes or no questions may give the interviewer more control, but they sharply limit the subject's ability to provide context, detail, and spontaneous recollection. Secondly, there is the issue of constrained wait time. An average pause of only 1 second between questions creates a rapid-fire pace that does not allow the interviewee sufficient time to search their memory, retrieve specific details, or form a thoughtful response. Thirdly, frequent interruptions can shatter a person's train of thought. When someone is interrupted after only a few seconds, they often begin adjusting their answers to match what they think the officer wants to hear, rather than reporting what they actually saw, heard, or experienced. Now, before I go any further, I want to make another important point. Investigative interviewing is not usually a skill that officers are taught or develop in basic police certification programs. In most agencies, it is considered advanced training. That means it requires time, funding, and institutional support. And as we know, many departments are severely underfunded, which makes specialized training like investigative interviewing very difficult to access. So why is all of this such a serious issue? Because if investigators do not know how to conduct effective interviews, they may fail to uncover the complete truth of what happened. As I mentioned in my episode on guidelines for homicide detectives, there are three major and critical components of every investigation: the physical evidence, the behavioral, and the informational. We cannot succeed without the information we gather from people. Simply put, people are our greatest asset. So because of that, the interview process must be designed to skillfully obtain necessary information while maintaining dignity and respect for the witness. It must also give witnesses the freedom and time they need to explain their experiences in their own words. In homicide investigations especially, the information obtained through interviews helps investigators piece the puzzle together alongside the physical evidence and observed or documented behavioral indicators. In the book I co-authored, Homicide: Guidelines for Conducting Homicide Investigations by Detectives and for Detectives, we provide a foundational set of steps for conducting effective interviews. I want to begin by describing the different types of witnesses investigators may encounter. The first category that we have are called general witnesses. Interviews are a critical component of any thorough investigation. To obtain the most accurate and reliable information, investigators should follow basic interview principles while adapting their approach to the circumstances, available resources, their agency capabilities, and, of course, each witness's individual characteristics. Now, witnesses generally classified as general witnesses, which we're going to address now, but we're also going to look at canvassing witnesses, critical witnesses, and persons of interest or suspects. Investigators should begin by identifying all potential witnesses, starting with the 911 caller, and then focusing on individuals connected to the victim or possible suspects. Witnesses should be separated according to their level of knowledge, such as general or critical, to prevent them from influencing one another. Each statement must be evaluated independently based on the witness's own observations and experience. Investigators should also determine whether witnesses have already spoken with law enforcement or others about the incident, conduct interviews privately, and continue identifying additional witnesses as the investigation develops. Open-ended questions should be used whenever possible to avoid introducing new information. Information gathered from general witnesses may later support victimology assessments or suspectology assessments. Let's move on now to the canvassing witness. A comprehensive and thorough neighborhood canvass is an invaluable tool in investigations. Many potential witnesses may be reluctant to proactively contact law enforcement with information, while others may possess vital information without realizing its significance. When contacted directly by investigators, however, they are often willing to share what they saw, heard, or otherwise know. A thorough canvass may also help identify additional critical witnesses. But I will note here just something for you to keep in mind, that one of the things that police complain about most is the lack of witnesses and that people are unwilling to talk to them. And that must be taken into consideration as well. But let's start with some of the things that need to be done. The detective should ensure a neighborhood canvass is conducted, should identify the neighborhood to canvass, working from the scene outward. Develop a list of questions to be asked during the canvass. Include questions related to the scene, such as victimology and/or suspects. Ensure that all officers cover the same pertinent material. Ensure that any unoccupied residence is scheduled for a second attempt to interview the occupants. Leave a business card at the door of all non-responsive locations and residences. Consider non-traditional witnesses, such as delivery personnel, maintenance personnel, and non-resident visitors. Now, as a side note here, and to underscore why every unoccupied resident should be scheduled for a second interview attempt, I want to share a true story that makes the point far better than theory ever could. A colleague of mine was reviewing a cold case homicide when he discovered two significant problems with the original neighborhood canvass. The questions had not been structured, and several apartments that were vacant or unanswered at the time were never revisited. In other words, potentially critical witnesses were simply lost because no one took the extra step to return. Recognizing how serious that oversight was, my colleague met with the police chief and the victim's family and asked for permission to canvass the area again. This time, using a standardized set of structured questions and making every reasonable effort to reach out not only the previously missed occupants, but also to re-interview those who still live there. By then, of course, some residents had moved away and others had moved in. But even the newer occupants, though they had no first-hand knowledge of the crime, could still have heard conversations, rumors, or details that might point investigators in the right direction. The police chief agreed. Investigators returned, and this time every available occupant was interviewed or re-interviewed using the same carefully designed questions. That simple correction in process produced exactly what had been missing the first time: new, actionable information. From the residents who had been overlooked in the original canvass, investigators obtained leads that had never surfaced before, including the name of an individual who had not previously been identified in the investigation. That individual proved to be the killer. The case was solved and a conviction followed. This lesson is clear. What may seem like a minor procedural omission at the outset of an investigation can be the very thing that prevents the truth from coming to light. A residence that is unoccupied today may contain tomorrow's most important witness, and failing to return is not a small oversight. It can mean missed evidence, misleads, and missed justice. So let's continue on now with the detective responsibilities relating to canvass witnesses. The detective should ensure that the appropriate data is collected, ensure that the results of each location are documented, be sure to identify who was interviewed, and all parties present at the time of the canvass. Identify parties generally present at the location, but maybe not present at the time of the canvass. Identify when and why those parties who are not present left the location. Expand the areas to be canvassed as appropriate, including locations that would or could have been in a position to see or hear the incident, or witness the arrival, flight, or preliminary actions of a person involved. Recanvass is necessary, including consideration of the same time and day of the week that the incident occurred. Consider non-traditional witnesses, such as delivery personnel, maintenance personnel, and non-resident visitors. Also consider monitoring traffic in the area for a period of time. Most people routinely take the same familiar routes in their day-to-day travel, which may help identify people who were in the area at the time of the incident. In summary, a thorough neighborhood canvass can provide investigators with vital information that helps identify what took place during the incident, what occurred beforehand, and what happened afterwards. It may also help identify the parties involved, others who were present, and individuals who may have additional knowledge or information. In addition, a neighborhood canvass may provide historical context regarding conditions or circumstances that may have been factors in the incident, such as prior behavior, conflicts between the parties, or associations among the parties and others. Now, investigators can use this information to assess the accuracy and honesty of statements collected and to help direct subsequent interviews and investigative steps. At this point, I want to move on to the critical witnesses. As the name suggests, a critical witness is someone who possesses especially important knowledge about the incident. This may include an eyewitness to the homicide or someone who observed a critical event connected to the investigation. Critical witnesses should be interviewed thoroughly and, when necessary, at length in order to identify and collect the most accurate, probative, and comprehensive information they have to offer. Due to the importance of these witnesses' knowledge, the detective should conduct the interview respectfully and politely in a private and secure location, never in front of other witnesses. Detectives should remain aware that these witnesses may be reluctant to speak with law enforcement and should make every effort to help them feel as comfortable as possible. While building rapport with a critical witness, the detective can assess the witness's level of cooperation, truthfulness, sophistication, intelligence, and education. The detective should also determine whether the witness has any concerns that may cause them to alter their statement at a later date. In most cases, depending on the significance of the witness's knowledge, two detectives should be present during the interview. One takes notes, while the other asks questions without interruption, allowing the witness to tell their story fully. Now, recording the interview by audio or video can eliminate the distractions caused by taking contemporaneous notes and provide a more thorough record of the interview. Next category would be suspect interviews. So we're going to talk about guidelines now. Suspect interviews should be conducted in much the same manner as a critical witness interview, with the additional consideration that the outcome may lead to criminal charges. Even so, suspects should be treated with respect, and the investigator should maintain a professional, cooperative, and businesslike demeanor to encourage a continued dialogue. It is strongly recommended, and in some jurisdictions or agencies required, that suspect interviews be audio or video or both recorded at all times. Detectives should continuously monitor suspects and determine whether the suspect has previously spoken with a law enforcement person. If so, investigators should identify who spoke with the suspect, the circumstances of that communication, what was said, and whether the suspect was in custody during any prior interaction. Rights advisement. Detectives should determine whether and when the suspect was advised of their Miranda rights, who provided the advisement, the circumstances under which it was given, and how the suspect responded. Investigators must also confirm that the suspect has not already invoked the right to counsel. When there is any uncertainty, detectives should advise the suspect of their rights in accordance with applicable law and agency policy. Now let's go to the transporting and monitoring of suspects. If a suspect is transported for an interview, detectives should instruct the transporting officers not to initiate any incident-related conversation. Likewise, personnel assigned to monitor the suspect before the interview or during breaks should not initiate discussions about the case. If the suspect initiates a conversation or any communication occurs, investigators should be notified immediately and the interaction should be documented. If no communication occurs, that should also be documented. Where legally permitted and available, audio or video recording during the transport may provide valuable evidence. Now let's go look at the setting. Suspects should be interviewed individually. Detectives should ensure that recording equipment is activated before the suspect enters the interview room. If required by law or agency policy, the suspect should be informed that the interview is being recorded. Once all participants are present, the door should be closed to provide privacy and minimize distractions. Now, at the onset of the interview, the detectives should, of course, identify themselves and ask the suspect to identify themselves. If suspect is not in custody, investigators should clearly state that fact and explain that the suspect is free to leave at any time. If the suspect is in custody, detectives must provide Miranda warnings before any questioning begins. Although the recording will document the advisement, it is still best practice to obtain a signed Miranda waiver. Conducting the interview, the detective should work to build rapport with the suspect and apply the same fundamental interviewing principles used in other interviews. Investigators should continuously assess the suspect's demeanor, their cooperation, and comfort needs, including access to restrooms or water. Open-ended questions should be used whenever possible to encourage fuller responses. Detectives should allow pauses and silence to continue when appropriate, rather than rushing to fill them, as suspects may provide additional information during these moments. Suspects should not be interrupted while giving their account. Investigators should revisit and clarify statements that appear false or incomplete, unreasonable, or inconsistent with known facts, or in conflict with witness statements. As long as they are talking, though, however, the detective should just be quiet and listen. The ultimate goal of a suspect interview is to keep the suspect engaged long enough to obtain an accurate and truthful account of the incident, including admissions, confessions, or false statements that can later be disproven. Such statements become powerful evidence in a future court proceedings because they are made in the suspect's own words. There are, however, two major cautions to keep in mind when interviewing suspects. First, Miranda is triggered when there is a custody and interrogation, so investigators must be guided by current case law on what qualifies as being in custody. Questioning alone without custody does not necessarily trigger Miranda. Second point, or caution, investigators must continuously assess the status of the interview. The moment an interview becomes custodial, it becomes an interrogation, and the relevant constitutional protections apply, along with any statutory time requirements for additional advisements. Investigators must remain aware of all jurisdictional requirements and proceed accordingly. Now, with all that said, I want you to remember one more thing here. Obtaining a confession is only the beginning of the investigation, because you now have to validate that information and verify everything that is said. Well, that's about it for this session on the basics of investigative interviewing. At a later date, I will provide a follow-up to this episode called Investigative Interviewing 2, The Models, referring to a session where I will discuss a couple of the various interview programs that are taught around the world. Models that will explain different approaches to the interview process. Thanks for listening. Should you have any questions about the investigative interviewing process or about other forensic disciplines, please reach out to me at jma.forensicinvestigator@gmail.com, or you can visit my website at www.jma4ensics.com. Goodbye, everybody. Enjoy and have a great day. Bye.